The kiss happened before she had a chance to say no. The smell hit her first 12-year-old scotch and hothouse lilies, and the particular warmth of a room containing 200 people who had paid $5,000 each to be there. Then the sound stopped. Not all of it, just the part that mattered. The string quartet, and the glasses, and the low murmur of money, talking to money. All of it dropping away in the space of 3 seconds as the man crossed the floor toward her and Elise Caldwell, clipboard in hand. Event coordinator badge clipped to the strap of a dress she had borrowed from her coworker because her own black dress had a coffee stain on the hem. Understood exactly too late that he was not slowing down. Mateo Reyes, whose name she had seen on the event brief and in the society pages, and once, years ago, in a newspaper headline she had not finished reading, put one hand along her jaw and kissed her in front of everyone. 2 photographers near the entrance raised their cameras. Neither of them had to be told twice. Every other person in the room held very still, the way people held still when they were unsure whether they were witnessing something wonderful or something dangerous and had not yet decided which answer they preferred. He pulled back first. He was closer than he should have been after, and he looked at her with dark eyes that held no apology and no explanation. Only a kind of deliberate attention that she would have called patience if she had not been so completely certain it was something else. "You're sleeping beside me tonight," he said, quietly enough that only she could hear it. "I'll explain when we're alone." He stepped back. He straightened his jacket. He turned to the nearest cluster of guests and accepted a glass of champagne from a passing tray as if the last 12 seconds had been entirely unremarkable. 2 men in dark suits materialized from somewhere near the service entrance and positioned themselves at the edges of her peripheral vision. They did not touch her. They did not need to. Elise stood in the middle of the Reyes Foundation gala with the clipboard she had been holding for 6 hours and looked at the lipstick smear on the rim of her own glass, which she had set down on a nearby table, and thought about all the things she could do and arranged them in order of likelihood. She could scream. She could walk to the nearest exit, which was 40 feet to her left, past the photographers, through the crowd that had resumed, pretending not to watch. She could call her supervisor. She could call the police and explain what she would explain. She could do any of these things, and she did none of them, which she would examine later, in private, because doing none of them was also a choice, and she needed to understand what that said about her. For now, she picked up her clipboard and walked to the back corridor and sat on a catering box and put her head in her hands for 45 seconds, which was all the time she could justify. When she came back out, one of the men in dark suits was waiting for her. He was not threatening, which was its own kind of threat. He was simply present, the way certain people were present in a way that communicated options without listing them. "Mr. Reyes would like to speak with you at the end of the evening," he said. He had a slight accent she could not place. "He asks that you not leave before then." A pause. "He also wanted me to tell you the Morrison floral arrangement in the east corridor needs to be moved 6 inches to the left. He said you'd know what he meant." She did know what he meant. She had been trying to fix the Morrison arrangement for 2 hours, ever since she noticed it was blocking the sightline from the bar to the stage. It was a detail so specific, so operational, so entirely inside the machinery of her job that it had no business being in the head of the man whose event this was. This was the first thing that frightened her, not the kiss, which could be explained various ways, and not the bodyguards, which were predictable, but the Morrison floral arrangement, which told her he had been watching her work long enough to know what she was paying attention to. She fixed the arrangement. She spent the next 40 minutes pretending she had not noticed that one of the men in dark suits was always in her peripheral vision, close enough to be there, but far enough to be deniable. She had worked events like this before. Events where certain guests came with security, and the security stood at angles that told you things about who they were protecting and from what. And she had learned to read the geometry of those angles, the way she read floor plans. As information, the geometry tonight was unusual. The two men were not watching the room. They were watching her. This was different. And she noted it and folded it into the part of her mind she had been using all evening to hold things she did not have time to process yet. And she went back to her clipboard and her radio and the 17 remaining items on the post-event checklist. She coordinated the silent auction close, the guest speaker's departure, the dessert service, the orderly extraction of 200 people who had been fed and flattered and separated from their checkbooks to the tune of $4.2 million for a children's literacy foundation. She directed her staff with the particular calm efficiency that had gotten her this job and kept her in it. The kind of calm that was not the absence of feeling, but the very deliberate management of it. And she did not think about the kiss, or the envelope, or the man who had produced both of them with the ease of someone who had been planning for longer than she had been aware there was anything to plan. She thought about those things later. In the kitchen corridor at 10:30, while her team packed the last of the equipment, and she stood next to a commercial refrigerator and breathed and understood that the two questions she had not been able to answer all evening were the same question: how much did he know about her, and for how long? At 10:47 at night, she was standing in a mostly empty ballroom with her clipboard and her borrowed dress and her bag, and Mateo Reyes was the only other person there who was not on her staff. "You knew about the Morrison arrangement," she said. "I watched you work it out at 6:15. He was holding 2 glasses of water, which he had apparently gotten himself. He offered her one. She took it because she had not had water in 3 hours, and she was tired enough that gratitude was faster than principle. You had the right instinct, but you didn't want to move it without checking the venue map. You checked it twice." He looked at her over his glass. "You were right both times. You watched me for 4 hours. I needed to know what kind of person you were. And now you know. And now I know." He set his glass down on the edge of the stage. "Your father's name was Richard Thomas Caldwell. He died 4 years ago. March. He ran a small import company out of an office in Queens for 22 years. He had 1 daughter." He paused. "You." The ballroom was very quiet. Somewhere behind her, a member of her staff was folding tablecloths with the steady rhythm of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Elise looked at Mateo Reyes across the space between them and felt the particular quality of being looked at by someone who already knew the answers to questions he had not yet asked. "I didn't tell you any of that," she said. "No," he said. "You didn't." He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and produced a folded envelope, cream-colored, unsealed, and held it out to her. "I think it's better if you read this before I explain the rest." She did not take the envelope. "How do you know my father's name?" He kept the envelope extended. His arm did not waver. "That's what the letter explains." She looked at him for a long moment. The tablecloth behind her reached its steady rhythm, and she stood in a ballroom at 10:47 at night with a man who had kissed her in front of 200 people, and who knew her father's middle name, and who was waiting with a patience that was not the absence of urgency, but the very precise management of it. "You said you'd explain when we were alone," she said. "We're alone now. Your men are outside that door." "They're outside the door," he said. "Not in this room." He was still holding the envelope. "I know this is not what you expected tonight. I know the way I handled it was not what it should have been. I made a decision under time pressure, and I would make it differently if I had more of it. But I don't have more of it." And the photograph already ran on 2 social feeds before the gala ended. He lowered the envelope slightly. "I need you to read the letter. Then I need you to come with me. And I need you to let me explain properly. After that, whatever you decide, I'll abide by it." 31 minutes earlier, she had still believed this was just another gala on her calendar. The 5th one this month. The kind of evening that ended with sore feet and a number to add to her project report. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. She took the envelope. He did not smile. He simply waited while she opened it. The paper inside was a single page, handwritten, dated 11 years ago. In a hand she recognized before she read a word of it, because it was the same hand that had written her name on birthday cards every year until she was 26, and her father had died in a march that did not feel real for a very long time afterward. She read the first line. She read the second. She folded the paper back into the envelope and held it at her side and said, very carefully, "What is this?" "The beginning of an explanation," Mateo said. "The rest is easier to hear sitting down." She looked at him. She put the envelope in her bag. "I'll decide after I hear the rest," she said. It was not agreement. It was not refusal. It was the only honest thing she had left. The apartment was on the 43rd floor of a building in Tribeca that did not have its name on the outside, which Elise noted because she had worked enough events to know that the buildings which did not advertise themselves were the ones that had decided long ago they did not need to. The elevator required a key card she did not have, operated by a man in a suit who did not make eye contact, and opened directly into a foyer the size of her entire apartment in Astoria. She looked at the art on the walls, which was real and not decorative, and thought about what it meant that she was noticing the art instead of thinking about the envelope in her bag. Mateo took off his jacket and set it over the back of a chair with the ease of someone for whom this space was genuinely home, not a performance of home. He poured 2 glasses of water without asking, set one on the low table in front of the sofa, and sat in the chair across from it, leaving the sofa for her. She did not sit immediately. She stood near the window and looked at the city below, which was doing what the city always did at this hour, being enormous and indifferent and lit up against its own darkness. And she thought about her father. Richard Thomas Caldwell had been a man of moderate habits and immoderate affection. He had driven the same car for 11 years. He had called Elise every Sunday at 9 in the morning until she asked him to call at 10 instead. And he had switched to 10 without complaint and called at 10 every Sunday afterward for the rest of his life. She had believed in his straightforwardness the way she believed in the structural integrity of floors, not consciously, simply as a condition of moving through the world. The envelope in her bag was the first evidence she had that the floor might have had a crack in it all along. She sat on the sofa. She took out the envelope. She put it on the table between them and looked at Mateo. "Tell me the rest," she said. He did not reach for the envelope. He looked at her with those steady dark eyes and he said, 12 years ago, your father needed money. His company was in trouble. Not catastrophic trouble. The kind that takes years to build and longer to notice. But by that point he had noticed, and the bank had noticed, and the gap between those 2 noticings was about $700,000. He paused. "My father, Arturo Reyes. You had a reputation for solving that kind of problem, for people who needed it solved quietly. Your father came to him." Elise kept her hands in her lap. He borrowed money from a crime family. He borrowed money from a man who ran several legitimate businesses and several that were less legitimate. Yes, something moved in his expression. Not discomfort, exactly. More like the kind of precision a person used when they had thought carefully about how to say something true. The loan terms were unusual. My father did not want interest. He wanted a guarantee. Me, a guarantee of alliance. Mateo said, "Your father signed a letter of intent. If the loan was not repaid in full within 10 years, the question of your marriage would fall within the consideration of the Reyes family." He watched her. It was not a binding legal document. It was a letter between 2 men who operated on the understanding that letters between them meant what they said. The city outside the window went on being enormous. Elise looked at the envelope on the table. He never repaid it. He repaid 300,000 of it over the following 8 years. Then he became ill, and the company struggled, and he died with $400,000 still outstanding. Pause. And the 10 years elapsed 14 months ago. She looked at him directly. And you waited 14 months. I spent 14 months trying to find another solution. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, which was the first time she had seen him assume a posture that was not entirely controlled. I want to be clear about something. I did not want to do this. I am doing this because I have a specific problem that requires a specific solution, and I have run out of alternatives and time. And I am going to explain that to you now, because you deserve to understand exactly what situation you are in. The word deserve landed differently than she expected it to. She had been bracing for a different kind of language. She had been bracing for the language of ownership. My uncle, Mateo said, Victor Reyes. He has been my father's right hand for 30 years, and he believes, not without reason, that he should have had more authority in this family than he was given. My father chose me as his successor. Victor has accepted this publicly and contested it privately, and for the last 18 months, he has been building a case to the other families we work with that I am not stable enough, not established enough, not properly grounded to lead. He looked at her, a man without a family of his own, without a partner, without roots in anything beyond the business, is a man who can be moved. That is Victor's argument. And a wife solves that. A wife who is publicly known, who appeared beside me at an event that was covered by every society page in the city, who is photographed entering and leaving my residence. Yes, it establishes exactly the stability Victor is arguing I lack. He sat back. I am asking you for 7 days. Appear with me at 2 events. Stay in this apartment so the building staff can confirm you are here. Allow the photographs that already exist to be the beginning of a narrative. At the end of 7 days, I will have done what I need to do with Victor, and I will give you a full legal release from any claim arising from your father's letter, and I will pay you the $400,000 that remained outstanding when he died. Elise sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the city made its ordinary noise. She looked at the envelope on the table, and she thought about her father's handwriting on birthday cards, the way he looped his lowercase letters with more care than most people used for their capitals. A man of moderate habits and immoderate affection, and she thought about what kind of person makes a deal like the one in that letter, and then calls his daughter every Sunday at 10 in the morning and never says a word. You could have called me, she said. 14 months ago. You could have knocked on my door and explained this. I could have. He did not look away. I didn't, because I needed to know who you were first, whether you would panic, go to the press, contact a lawyer who would make things loud before I was ready. Pause. I watched you for 4 months. Your work, how you handled difficult situations, whether you kept your head. You were deciding if I was useful. I was deciding if I could trust you. He said it without apology. There's a difference. She looked at the envelope on the table. She looked at the water glass she had not touched. She thought about the 2 questions she had been asking herself all evening. How much he knew about her, and for how long. And now she had an answer to both, and the answer was worse than she had imagined, and also, somehow, more explicable than she had feared. He was not random. He had been careful. This did not make it better. It made it something she could work with, which was a different thing entirely. The letter, she said, in my bag. What does it say? A reference to the arrangement. In your father's handwriting. He wrote it to my father as confirmation of his understanding of the terms. Mateo looked at her steadily. I gave it to you because I thought you should have something in his hand, something that made it real, and not just my word. A pause. You can keep it. She picked up the water glass. She drank half of it. She set it down and looked at the envelope, and then looked at him. 7 days, she said. 7 days. 2 appearances. 2 appearances. The fundraiser at the cultural center on Thursday and a family dinner on Saturday. He watched her. After Saturday, Victor will have made his move, or he won't. And either way, I'll have what I need. She turned the envelope over in her hands. She thought about sitting on a catering box in a back corridor and putting her head in her hands for 45 seconds, and about the fact that she had not left when she could have. She recognized the pattern in herself. It meant she had already made the decision. She just had not told herself yet. There are things I need, she said. Name them. I keep my own phone. I contact my employer and tell them I have a family situation that requires me to take personal days, which is true in a way I don't fully understand yet. I sleep in a room with a door that locks. She looked at him. And you tell me the truth, not partial truth, not the version of truth that is strategically useful. If I'm going to do this, I need to know what I am walking into. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, agreed. All of it. He stood and crossed to a door off the hallway and opened it, and she could see from where she sat that it was a bedroom, simply furnished, with a window that faced the same city she had been looking at. There's a lock, he said. The key is on the inside. She stood. She picked up her bag. She crossed the room and stopped in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at him over her shoulder. There was a question she had been holding since the ballroom, since the moment the envelope had come out of his jacket pocket with that particular certainty. You said you watched me for 4 months, she said. Professional reputation. How I handled difficult situations. She looked at him. Did you decide? Yes, he said. And he looked at her across the length of the hallway. You keep your head, he said, even when you shouldn't have to. She went into the bedroom and closed the door and locked it from the inside. And she sat on the edge of the bed and took the envelope out of her bag and held it for a long time before she opened it and read it properly. Every line. In her father's careful looping hand. And when she was done, she folded it back up and held it in both hands and sat with the city outside the window and thought about a man who had called her every Sunday at 10 in the morning and had never, not once, said a word. The fundraiser on Thursday was at the Meridian Cultural Center on the Upper East Side, a building that had been a bank in another century and still carried the architecture of something built to communicate permanence. Elise had been to 3 events there. She knew the loading dock entrance, the caterer's staging area, the particular acoustic problem in the East Gallery that made speeches sound like they were coming from underwater. She did not know what it felt like to arrive through the front entrance in a car with tinted windows, while a photographer she had never seen before raised a camera from the sidewalk, and someone she had spent 3 days learning to read placed his hand at the small of her back in a way that was entirely for the photographer, and also, she noticed, entirely steady. She had spent the 3 days between the gala and tonight in the Tribeca apartment, in a state she could only describe as operational. She had called her employer and said family emergency, which was true. She had texted her friend Cora and said, I am fine. Do not worry, which was partially true. She had eaten meals that Mateo's housekeeper left in the kitchen without comment and slept in the locked bedroom and had 3 conversations with Mateo that were factual and brief and conducted mostly in the kitchen in the morning over coffee, during which he had briefed her on who would be at Thursday's fundraiser and what she needed to know about the dynamics of the room. Victor Reyes would be there. Several of the families they worked with would be there. She needed to know 2 names and avoid a third, and she needed to stand beside Mateo for long enough to be photographed doing it. And beyond that, she could conduct herself however she chose. He said this last part in a tone that suggested he meant it, and she had filed it under things she was not ready to examine yet. The fundraiser was for a music education program. The crowd was money in its particular Manhattan form, art collectors and real estate developers, and a certain kind of old family name that moved through rooms like it owned them, without needing to say so. Elise stood beside Mateo in the receiving line, and shook hands, and said the things a person said in a receiving line, and watched the room the way she had always watched rooms at events. With the professional attentiveness that catalogued who was talking to whom and who was watching without appearing to, she noticed Victor Reyes the moment he arrived. He was perhaps 60, with a kind of physical presence that did not come from size, but from the way a person occupied space, the quality of taking up exactly the amount of room they intended to, and no more or less. He had grey at his temples and a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, and he moved through the room with the ease of someone who had been in this kind of room since before Elise was born. He kissed a woman on both cheeks near the entrance. He spoke to two men she did not recognize. Then he looked across the room and found Mateo, and the look he gave his nephew lasted exactly 2 seconds, which was long enough to tell Elise everything Mateo had already told her, and several things Mateo had not. "He's here," she said, quietly, looking straight ahead. "I know." Mateo's hand moved from the small of her back to the inside of her elbow. A shift so small no one watching would have registered it, but which felt to her like a change in key. "He'll come to us. Don't look at him until he does." She did not look at Victor. She looked at the string quartet in the corner, and the waitstaff moving through the crowd, and a painting on the far wall that she had seen reproduced in an art magazine 2 years ago, and had not known was here. And she stood beside Mateo, and waited with the same patience she used at events when the timeline was running behind, and there was nothing to do but hold the space until it caught up. Victor came to them at 8:17, carrying a glass of red wine he had not touched. "Mateo." He embraced his nephew with the warmth of a man who did everything in front of witnesses well. Then he looked at Elise with a smile that arrived on his face fully assembled, the way smiles arrived when they had been prepared in advance. "And this must be the woman everyone is talking about." "Elise Caldwell," Mateo said. Victor took her hand. His grip was brief and dry, and told her nothing except that he had shaken a great many hands and used each one to gather information. "Richard Caldwell's daughter," he said. He said it pleasantly. He said it the way someone said a thing they wanted you to know they already knew. "I was sorry to hear about your father." "A good man." Elise looked at him. She kept her face at the temperature of polite interest, and she said, "Thank you." "Did you know him?" Something moved behind Victor's eyes. A small, quick thing. There and gone. "We had mutual acquaintances," he said. "Business sometimes puts people in the same orbit." He looked at Mateo. "The original arrangement between our families goes back further than most people realize. It's good to see it being honored." The phrase landed like a stone dropped into still water. Elise felt Mateo's hand shift again, a barely perceptible steadying at her elbow, and she understood that this was Victor's move, the first visible one, and that it was aimed at her specifically. A test to see if she knew what she knew. She looked at Victor with the same expression she used when a client said something designed to rattle her before a contract negotiation, which was the expression of a person who had heard the sentence and was deciding how much of it to dignify with a response. "Family arrangements that last are worth honoring," she said. She let a beat of silence sit there. "Would you excuse us? I've been wanting to look at the hopper in the East Gallery all evening." She moved. Mateo moved with her. They crossed the room in a direction that took them away from Victor and toward the East Gallery, and she felt the particular quality of his attention shift beside her, not relaxing, but adjusting. When they were out of Victor's sightline, she said, quietly, "He was telling me he knows about the letter." "Yes." "He wanted to see if I'd react." "Yes." "Ah, Pause. You didn't." I work events, she said. Difficult clients are a professional requirement. She stopped in front of the hopper, which was a small painting of a diner interior, and looked at it and felt the particular sensation of a room that was holding more information than it was showing, which was what Hopper was always doing, and which seemed appropriate. He knew my father's name. He said the arrangement goes back further than most people realize. She looked at Mateo. What does he know exactly? He knows about the letter. He's known for years. My father told him. Mateo looked at the painting beside her, which she understood was so they could talk without appearing to. What he doesn't know is how much I've told you. He came over here to measure that. And what he saw was me not reacting, which tells him, you either don't know or you know and aren't afraid. He paused. Either way, it's not what he was hoping for. Elise looked at the diner in the painting, the two figures at the counter, the particular American loneliness of it, and thought about her father making a phone call 12 years ago to a man she had never heard of and setting something in motion that had arrived in the form of a kiss in a ballroom that she had not been able to walk away from. She thought about patterns. She thought about the fact that she was standing in a gallery with a man she had met 4 days ago, speaking quietly about a chess match she had been a piece in before she knew the game was being played. What does he do next? She said. He waits to see if tonight's photographs produce the result he's hoping won't happen. Mateo turned slightly. A small movement that put his shoulder between her and the rest of the room, not as a shield exactly, but as a deliberate orientation. If the photographs run and the narrative holds, he loses the argument he's been building. A man with a partner, with a public presence, with stability, is not the man Victor has been describing to the other families. He looked at her. If the narrative doesn't hold, if you disappear, or the story falls apart, Victor gets exactly what he's been working toward. So, the family dinner on Saturday matters. The family dinner on Saturday is where Victor will make his final argument, in front of everyone who counts. And it is where I need you standing beside me, not because I tell you to, but because you choose to. He said this last part carefully. The way he said things, he had thought about. I know that distinction matters to you. She looked at him. She thought about 3 days of operational mornings and briefings at kitchen tables, and the locked bedroom, and the city outside the window, and the letter in her bag that she had read 4 times now, each time finding something different in it. The way you found different things in a room each time you returned to it. She thought about a man she had watched across a ballroom for 3 days, from the corner of a hired professional's eye, and what she had seen. She thought about the word deserve. It does, she said. The distinction matters. He nodded once. He turned back toward the room. We should circulate for another hour, he said. Then we can leave. She looked at the painting one more moment. 2 figures at a counter. The loneliness of being in a well-lit room and still somehow being in the dark. She turned away from it and back toward the room and let the professional calm settle over her the way it always did when the work was what was required. And she circulated for another hour and said the things a person said and watched Victor Reyes watch her from across various distances and did not look back any more than was necessary. And when they left the building, the photographer was still on the sidewalk, and she did not look at his camera either. In the car, Mateo said, "You handled Victor well." She looked out the window at the city going past. "I've been handling difficult people in expensive rooms since I was 23, she said. He's the first one who actually had something to threaten with. A pause in the car. Does that make it harder or easier? She thought about it. Clearer, she said. It makes it clearer. She kept looking at the window and at the city doing what the city did. Enormous and indifferent. And she thought about Saturday and what choosing looked like, and whether she had started doing it already or whether that was still ahead of her. The answer, she suspected, was that she had started without noticing, which was how most things began. Her mother called at 9:47 on Friday evening, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the opening sentence. "There's a box in the hall closet at my house," her mother said. "Your father's things, the ones I never went through." A pause on the line. The particular pause of someone who has been holding something for a while and has decided tonight is the night to put it down. "He left a letter in the safe. He told me not to give it to you unless you ever asked about the Reyes family." Elise was sitting at the kitchen counter in the Tribeca apartment, drinking tea she had made herself because Mateo was in a late call in his office, and the kitchen was the room she had started to feel most comfortable in, which was information about herself she was filing away for later. She set the mug down. "He told you about the Reyes family. He told me a name. He said if you ever came to me asking about a man named Reyes, I was to give you the letter from the safe." Her mother's voice was steady in the way it had always been steady. The particular steadiness of a woman who had absorbed a great deal over the course of a long life and had learned that steadiness was a choice you made each morning rather than a condition you were born with. "I saw a photograph of you on the internet this morning with a man named Reyes." Elise looked at the kitchen window and the dark city behind it. "Yes," she said. "Are you all right?" "I don't know yet." She thought about it. "I think so. Are you at home now?" "I'm at home. I'm coming tonight." She left a note on the kitchen counter. She was in a car, headed to Queens 40 minutes later, and for the length of the ride, she looked at the city going past and thought about her mother sitting at the kitchen table in the house in Forest Hills where Elise had grown up, sitting with a letter in her hands that she had been keeping for however many years, and the specific quality of keeping something on behalf of someone who was gone, of holding it without knowing what it contained, of trusting that the right moment would announce itself. The house smelled the way it always smelled, coffee and a particular brand of laundry detergent, and the faint, old paper smell of a house that contained a lot of books. Her mother was at the kitchen table with a mug of her own and an envelope on the table between them, cream-colored, sealed, Elise's name on the outside in her father's careful looping hand. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "He made me promise," she said. "He said you would only need it if something happened that brought the Reyes name into your life. He said if that happened, it meant things were working the way they were supposed to." "Working," Elise said. "That's the word he used." Her mother pushed the envelope across the table. "He also said not to be afraid of it. He was very specific about that part." Elise picked up the envelope. She held it the way she had held the other one, in the Tribeca bedroom, feeling the weight of her father's handwriting before she broke the seal. Then she broke the seal. The letter was 3 pages, which was longer than she expected from a man of moderate habits. The handwriting was the same as always, small and careful, with the looping lowercase letters that she had stopped being able to look at in the year after he died without a physical sensation she did not have language for. She read it at the kitchen table in the house in Forest Hills with her mother sitting across from her, reading something else to give her the privacy of her own face. He had known she would not forgive him immediately, and he was not asking for that. He was asking her to read to the end before she decided, because she had always, since she was small, preferred to make decisions quickly and completely and not revisit them. He had borrowed money from Arturo Reyes because the company was failing, and he did not want her mother to spend the rest of her life worried about money. He had signed the letter of intent because in that world, a letter of intent was the currency of trust, and there was no loan without it. He had believed he would repay it in full. He had not. He got sick, and the arithmetic stopped being something he could affect. In the years between signing and dying, he had done the one thing available to him. He spent 4 years watching Mateo Reyes, newspapers, financial reports, conversations with people who knew people, His view was this: Mateo Reyes was a man who had been given something he had not entirely asked for, and was attempting to carry it with more integrity than the institution perhaps deserved. He was not his father. He was, as far as Richard Caldwell could determine from a distance of several miles and several years, a person who tried to do right within a structure that did not always make that easy. This was not a guarantee. He was not saying Mateo Reyes was good. He was saying he was trying to be, which was the most honest description available for most people, including himself. He was sorry he had not been brave enough to tell her while he could. The only honest conversation he could have with her about this was one he would not be present for. The last paragraph was in a different pen, written later, possibly when he already knew he was ill. I chose to trust a man I have never met, based on evidence gathered at a distance. I know this is not how you would have chosen. You would have wanted to make the choice yourself, and you should have been allowed to. That is the part I cannot make right. What I can tell you is that the evidence suggested he would be the kind of person who, when the moment came, would let you make the choice. Whether he lives up to that is something only you can know. Elise put the letter down on the kitchen table. Her mother looked up from her book. She looked at Elise's face for a moment, and then she got up and poured more tea into Elise's mug without asking, which was the kindness of someone who understood that certain moments did not require commentary. He spent 4 years watching, Elise said. He worried about you, her mother said, after he signed that letter. He worried about you every day. He thought that was fair. It was his mistake, and you were carrying the consequence of it without knowing. She sat back down. He said the only thing he could do was make sure the person on the other end was someone worth your time. Elise looked at the pages on the kitchen table. She thought about a man in Queens watching Mateo Reyes from a distance of several miles and several years, gathering evidence for a question he could not answer directly. She thought about Mateo saying, "I watched you for 4 months." The same action from the opposite end. 2 people doing the same thing for the same reason. She thought about the word deserve. She thought about what her father had understood from a distance would matter to her most, whether Mateo would let her make the choice. She picked up the letter and folded it back into the envelope and put it in her bag beside the other one. She stood up. She kissed her mother on the cheek. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. "Are you going back there?" Elise looked at her mother. She thought about a kitchen counter in Tribeca, and a note she had left on it, and a man who was in a late call in his office, and had not come after her because he understood, somehow, that coming after her was not the right move. She thought about what it meant that she had left a note rather than nothing, which was also a choice she had made, without fully acknowledging it. "Yes," she said. The ride back was 45 minutes. When the car stopped in Tribeca, she sat for a moment before she got out. Then she got out. He was in the kitchen when she came in. He was standing at the counter with a glass of water, and he looked at her when she came through the door, and he read something in her face, and he did not say a word. She set her bag down on the counter. She took out both envelopes and put them side by side on the counter between them. She looked at them, and then she looked at him. "My mother had a letter," she said. "My father wrote it. He left it with her, to give to me, if I ever came across your name." She paused. "He spent 4 years watching you, to decide if you were worth trusting." Mateo looked at the envelopes on the counter. Something moved through his expression. Not surprise, exactly. More like the recognition of something he had suspected, without knowing how to confirm. "He contacted my father once," he said, "about 2 years before he died. He said he wanted to understand what the arrangement would mean in practice. My father told me about it. I didn't know what to do with it." "What did your father tell him?" "That it would mean whatever the people involved chose to make it mean." A pause. "My father was not always precise, but he was occasionally accurate." Elise looked at the 2 envelopes on the counter, the one from Mateo's jacket, her father's handwriting on the reference letter, the one from the safe in Forest Hills. 3 pages of her father's careful attempt to fix, at a distance, what he could not fix directly. She thought about the choices she had made over the last week, without fully acknowledging she was making them. The note on the counter, the decision not to leave, the word "I'll stay," said in a car on a Tuesday night to a man she had known for 4 days. She thought about her father's last paragraph. Whether he lives up to that is something only you can know. She looked at Mateo. "You said the Saturday dinner is where I need to stand beside you by choice," she said. "Not because you've asked." "Yes, I'm going to be there," she said. "Not because of the letter of intent, or the 7 days, or the $400,000. She held his gaze. "I'm going to be there because my father spent 4 years deciding you were worth trusting, and I have spent 1 week deciding the same thing, and we arrived at the same answer. And I would rather stand beside someone I have decided to stand beside than be moved around a board." She paused. "I want you to know the difference." He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was very still. He looked at her with those dark, steady eyes, and he said, carefully, "I know the difference." He paused. "And I should have told you everything from the beginning. I chose not to, because I was managing risk, and I was wrong. That's a pattern I have, and it's a bad one, and I want you to know I understand that it's bad." She looked at him. Both of them had watched. Both of them had arrived at the same answer. "We'll talk about that more," she said. "After Saturday." He nodded. He did not push. He picked up his water glass and said, "There's tea in the pot if you want some. Your kind. The one without caffeine." She looked at him. The fact of the tea was small and unremarkable and entirely precise. "When did you notice that?" she said. "The second morning." He said, "You read the box before you made it. Most people don't." She put both envelopes back in her bag. She poured herself tea and stood at the counter drinking it. And Mateo leaned against the opposite counter and did not make conversation, which was exactly the right thing. Some things were decided in rooms without anyone announcing it. This was one of them. She did not sleep much. She lay in the locked bedroom with the 2 envelopes on the nightstand and thought about Saturday, which was in 11 hours. And at some point before dawn, she stopped trying to sleep and sat at the window and watched the city do what it did in the hours before it decided to be morning. At 6, she made coffee. Mateo was already in the kitchen. He looked at her and did not ask how she had slept, which was the right thing, and he poured her a mug without being asked, and the silence was not uncomfortable, which was information she had stopped being surprised by. At 8, she called Cora. She said, "I am going to a family dinner tonight with a man I have known for 1 week, and I need a dress that says I am here by choice, not by obligation." There was a silence on Cora's end that contained several questions and the decision to ask none of them, which was why Cora was her closest friend. She arrived at 9:15 with 4 options. The dress Elise chose was dark green. She put it on and went out to meet what came next. The Reyes family dinner was held at a restaurant in the West Village that did not have a sign outside and did not need one. Mateo met her in the lobby of the Tribeca building at 6:45. He looked at her and he said, "You look like someone who made a decision." She looked at him and she said, "I did." They went to the car. The restaurant was a private room in the back, the kind that had no windows and very good acoustics, and a table long enough to seat 20, which tonight it did. Elise had worked events in rooms like this. She knew their grammar. She sat beside Mateo at the long table, and she watched the room the way she had always watched rooms, with professional attention that catalogued who was aligned with whom and where the pressure was being distributed. And she found Victor Reyes at the far end of the table before she found her water glass. He was watching her. He had been watching her. She understood. Since she walked in, not with hostility, with the specific attention of someone completing a calculation, He had seen the photographs from Thursday. He had drawn his conclusions. And he was sitting at the far end of the table with a glass of wine he had not touched, and a patience that she recognized as the same quality she had identified in Mateo. Except that in Victor, it had been refined over decades into something denser and more deliberate. He was waiting to see what she would do. Dinner was served in courses. The conversation was the conversation of people who had known each other a long time and were performing normalcy for two audiences each other. And her. Elise ate and said the things a person said and understood. About midway through the second course, exactly what Victor's move was going to be. He made it over the fish course. When the table had relaxed into smaller conversations, he raised his glass and said, in a voice pitched to carry, without appearing to a toast, to the arrangement that has brought us all together, to the Caldwell family, and the Reyes family, and the bond that goes back further than most of us in this room remember. The table quieted. Heads turned. Victor was smiling the smile she had seen at the fundraiser, fully assembled, looking at her across the table with meaning that was entirely clear. You are here because of an arrangement your father made, not because of any choice of your own. He was trying, in front of everyone who counted, to reduce her to a piece of paper. She picked up her glass. She did not look at Mateo. She looked at Victor Reyes at the far end of the table, and she said, in a voice that carried exactly as far as his had, with the particular clarity she had learned, projecting across ballrooms and exhibition halls and conference rooms for 12 years, I'd like to offer my own toast, if you don't mind. The table was very quiet. Victor's smile did not waver, but something behind it did. My father left me a letter, Elise said. He wrote it years ago and left it with my mother to give to me when the Reyes name came into my life. He spent 4 years making sure I would be all right. She let that land. She did not rush the next part. He wrote that he had chosen to trust someone he had never met based on evidence gathered at a distance, and that he was sorry he hadn't let me make the choice myself. He was right to be sorry about that. She paused, but he was also right about the other part. I've made the choice now, myself, with full information and without any obligation from any arrangement. I'm here because I chose to be. She looked at Victor directly. I wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone at this table. She raised her glass. To my father, who was a man of moderate habits and immoderate affection, and who did his best with what he had. The table held still for 1 second. Then Mateo raised his glass beside her. Then someone across the table raised theirs. Then the rest of the table followed, the way a table followed, when a room had understood that something had just been settled, and Victor Reyes at the far end raised his glass last. A beat behind everyone else, which told her everything about where he stood and which direction it was. She drank. She set her glass down. She did not look at Mateo. She looked at her plate and breathed the way she breathed through difficult things, steadily, and one thing at a time. And she heard Mateo say, very quietly, close enough that only she could hear it, "That was not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I expected to handle it myself." She looked at him then. "I know," she said. "That's why I handled it first." Something moved in his expression, something she had not seen there before, a loosening of the management, a quality of being caught without the usual armor in place. It lasted 3 seconds, which she thought was probably longer than most people got. Then the table resumed around them, and the fish course continued, and Victor Reyes, at the far end, did not raise another toast. After dinner they stood in the small lobby waiting for the car. She stood beside Mateo and felt the tiredness of a person who has done something that required a great deal of them and has come out the other side, still standing. He did not speak immediately, which she had come to understand was how he moved through moments that mattered to him. "The letter," he said finally. "What your father wrote about me. I'd like to know what it said, if you're willing to tell me. She thought about it. He said you were trying to be good within a structure that didn't always make that easy. She looked at him. He said, trying to be was the most honest description available for most people, including himself. Mateo was quiet for a moment. He sounds like someone I would have liked to meet. He would have asked you a great many questions, she said, and he would have expected honest answers. I could have managed that. I know, she said. That was his conclusion too. The car arrived. They stood at the door for a moment before they got in, and she looked at him in the particular way she had been looking at him for days now, with the professional attentiveness she had started applying to things she found worth paying attention to, and she thought about a man in Queens with a newspaper and a long view, and the patience to watch and wait and trust that the right moment would announce itself. She thought about the specific stubbornness of that kind of love, the kind that worked at a distance on problems it could not reach directly. 7 days, she said. That was the original arrangement. Yes, he said. Today is day 8. He looked at her. The night air came through the open door of the restaurant, and the city made its ordinary noise outside, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her across a ballroom 8 days ago, with that particular steady attention that did not look away. Yes, he said. It is. She got into the car. He got in beside her. The door closed. She looked at the city going past and thought about the note she had left on Friday night. I am going to my mother's. I will be back. Because the I will be back was the honest part, and she had needed to see it written down before she walked out the door. She had come back. She was here. That was the thing about choices. You made them in small increments. In notes left on counters and dresses chosen for the color. In glasses raised at long tables. And at some point, you looked at the accumulation and understood that the sum of the increments was a direction, and you had been walking in it for longer than you knew. She looked at Mateo beside her in the car. He was looking out his own window. She thought about the second morning and the tea made from a box read before it was opened. Such a small thing to notice. And what it had told her. The apartment, she said. The Tribeca apartment. You should know that I read the box before I make the tea, because my mother taught me that. She said it was the only way to know if you actually wanted it before you committed. He looked at her. Does that apply to more than tea? It applies to most things, she said. I read the situation. Then I decide. And you've read this one. She looked out the window at the city going past. Yes, she said. I have. The car moved through the city. Neither of them said anything else. The silence was the silence of two people who had arrived at the same place by different roads and looked up and recognized the terrain. And outside the windows, the city went on being the city. Enormous and indifferent, full of its own arrangements, which had nothing to do with two people in a car on a Saturday night, and everything to do with it.